Hello, dear friends. Spell casting no longer works. All spells are being returned to the ascender as the frequency of the earth and souls increases. It is a form of instant karma. The old order is falling apart. It will get a little ugly, but the storm will be minimal for those who are prepared. Welcome to the Great Awakening. Something big is coming, and the people affected are scared. Opinion piece. The end of globalization. New world financial order. The old order is crumbling. A financial revolution is coming. The West is losing the basis of its power. Likely division of the economy into blocs. This breakdown has been brewing for years. US withdrew its naval force from the Black Sea. IMF warns of the risk of a weakening dollar. BRICS countries set up a new financial system. Russia postpones deadline to buy its gas in rubles. Mysterious waves discovered in the sun that violate the laws of physics. Let's start. A new world financial order is approaching, said Dmitry Medvedev, former president of Russia and current deputy chairman of the country's Security Council, on Wednesday. Now we have the confirmation of a new financial order that has nothing to do with the World Economic Forum of Davos promoted by Klaus Schwab. Medvedev noted that Russia is losing confidence in reserve currencies such as the dollar of the euro. In any case, he said that it will be necessary, in quotes, to negotiate the new world financial order, and stressed that the main role will be played by countries that have a strong and advanced economy, healthy public finances, and a sound monetary system. Globalization is the process of interaction and integration between people, companies, and governments around the world. It is a historical and social process of worldwide integration in political, cultural, technological, and economic fields, with the aim of making the world a place where all these aspects can be interconnected. Opinions in plural. The confiscation of foreign reserves by Washington is pushing different countries to look for other currencies and safer mechanisms, said Spanish writer and journalist Rafael Poch de Feliu. Larry Fink, head of the investment management firm BlackRock, wrote last week in an annual report to shareholders that the Russian invasion, in quotes, totally altered the world order that had been in place since the end of the Cold War, and ended the globalization we have experienced over the past 3 decades, a large-scale realignment of supply chains that is bound to be inflationary, Fink predicted. Adam Posen, president of the Peterson Institute for International Economics, wrote in Foreign Affairs that the world economy, in quotes, is likely to split into blocks, one that will revolve around China and one that will revolve around the US. Crisis. For decades, the free flow of world trade allowed rich nations to maintain easy access to goods and services at low prices. It guaranteed them strong economies and stable markets. It also generated an era of extremely low inflation in the US and Europe, according to Paul Weissman. While this rupture has been years in the making, it was completed by the war in Ukraine. It probably represents the end of an era in which countries with opposing political systems, both democracies and authoritarian governments, could trade to their mutual benefit. It seems illusory to think that nations with different systems could take their disputes to the World Trade Organization and hope for a peaceful resolution. The war in Ukraine, however, may have dealt a mortal blow to that system. Prices, which were already on the rise, continued to rise. Supply chains affected by the crisis face new pressures, and the growing rift between democracy and autocracies further clouds the global landscape. The emerging New World Order puts multinational companies in a delicate position. They must strive to keep costs low and profits high, while severing ties with Russia and facing pressure from consumers. Fragmentation. The unprecedented sanctions imposed on Russia threaten to dilute the dollar's dominance and generate more fragmented international monetary system, writes International Monetary Fund Deputy Managing Director Gita Gopinath. Speaking to the Financial Times, the Economist predicts a possible emergence of a small monetary blocs based on trade between separate groups of countries as a result of sanctions that prevent Russia from accessing international payment mechanisms, such as the SWIFT system. In quotes, the dollar would remain the main global currency even in such a scenario, but the fragmentation at a lower level is certainly very possible. We are already seeing it with some countries renegotiating the currency in which they are paid for trade, he said. The expert explains that countries tend to accumulate reserves in the currency in which they trade with the rest of the world and in which they borrow from the rest of the world. So, in quotes, you may see a slow trend of other currencies coming to play a bigger role. Gopinath acknowledged that the dollar's share of central banks' international reserves has fallen from 70% to 60% over the past 2 decades due to trade in other currencies, led by the Australian dollar. Greater use of China's currency, the yuan, could be responsible for a quarter of this decline, he said, although he noted that the yuan's share of global international reserves is below 3%. Despite Beijing's efforts to internationalize its currency, including the new digital version, the Economist doesn't believe the yuan can wrest in its dominance from the dollar in the medium term, due to the free convertibility of the US currency and the support of strong, reliable institutions and broad markets. Gopinath believes that the change in the financial situation due to the conflict in Ukraine will encourage digital finance, be it cryptocurrencies or central bank digital currency. So he stressed the importance of international regulation in this area. Venezuela. The BRICS countries are configuring a new financial system, assures Maduro. The president of Venezuela defended that one should not be using the economy to threaten countries. He assured that the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are in the process of a financial revolution, building an architecture of financial and political cooperation, and aiming to be one of the main protagonists of the world that is being born. In this sense, he pointed out that the Economic Trade Association has been carrying out initiatives for the configuration of a new financial and monetary system that opens the door to all the countries of the world. He said that Venezuela has banned from selling oil and that international banking shouldn't be used to threaten countries. Moscow and Caracas are moving forward in negotiations to connect Venezuela to the mirror payment system established by the Central Bank of Russia in 2017. However, for this to be finalized, there must be an approval from the Central Bank of the South American country. History. 3 decades ago, when the Cold War ended, globalization looked promising. The Soviet Union had collapsed. Communist China was emerging from isolation and trading with the world. China joined the world the WTO in 2001, and Russia joined in 2012. Scholar Francis Fukuyama made his famous claim that the end of history had been reached and that the future belonged to pro-free market democracies such as those in the US and Europe. Trade accelerated. Multinationals took their production to China and to take advantage of its cheap labor. They further reduced their costs by adopting a strategy of buying only the materials needed at the time. Profits multiplied. Cheap imports from China gave consumers access to low-priced toys, clothing and electronic pieces. Some encouraged the hope that freer trade could push the Chinese and other authoritarian governments to be more open. But problems arose. Europe became dependent on energy supplies from Putin's Russia. In 2011, an earthquake followed by a tsunami damaged auto parts factories in Japan. A parts shortage gripped US auto factories and reminded that supply chains across the Pacific were vulnerable to disruption. Innovation will suffer because Western scientists will collaborate less with the Russians and Chinese. The loss of access to cheap labor and materials will force the Western firms to charge more for their products, and consumers will not have access to cheap pieces. Financial Revolution. Financial Revolution by Nick Corbichely. Unbeknownst to most, a financial revolution is looming that threatens to change everything. About 90 central banks are in the process of experimenting with or are already testing digital central bank currencies. The actual number of economies involved far exceeds 100 of the world's 190 countries. They include all G20 economies and together account for more than 90% of global GDP. In his latest letter to investors, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink said that the Ukrainian conflict has the potential to accelerate the development of digital currency around the world. China has already launched its own digital yuan and is testing its use in more than a dozen cities and regions. It was also experimenting with its cross-border functionality. This has ignited fears in the West that its financial leadership is under threat, fears that have been magnified by sanctions on Russia and the attitude of many countries around the globe to see an alternative cross-border payment system. The introduction of digital currency could not only strip the world's citizens of one of the last vestiges of freedom, privacy, and anonymity, i.e. cash, but could also exacerbate the upward transfer of wealth and power to many societies have witnessed. If not carefully constrained in advance by law, they have the potential to become more than the dream of a technocratic central planner. They could represent the greatest simple expansion of totalitarian power in history. Rumors of war. First, Russian troops around Kiev regroup to focus on Donbass. Second, Ukraine expects a Russian assault in the east after the invaders fell back near Kiev. Third, the Russian army took control of the settlement of Zolotaya Niva. Fourth, Russia continues to attack Chernobyl, northern Ukraine, despite Moscow's claim to have reduced its offensive both around that city and in the capital Kiev, according to Britain's Ministry of Defense. 5. Demoralized Russian soldiers in Ukraine reportedly refused to carry out orders, sabotaged their own equipment, and accidentally shot down their airplanes. Britain's intelligence chief said Thursday. 6. The US withdrew its naval force from the Black Sea to make clear it is not interested in getting involved in the conflict in Ukraine. 7. Putting orders ban on foreign software. Moscow seeks to reduce reliance on foreign technology in its critical infrastructure. Negotiations. First, Ukraine optimistic in peace talks. Russia says no progress. Second, Ukraine withdraws ambassadors from unsupportive countries. Third, the Donbass contemplates a referendum to join Russia. 4. South Ossetia will soon take legal steps to join Russia. Europe. First, Ukraine war cyber attack affected thousands in Europe. Second, Russia to sell gas globally in rubles, and the US digest its expulsion from the G20. Third, Europe objects to paying for gas in rubles, and Russia's currency shows its muscles. Fourth, Germany initiates an emergency plan in case of gas supply cutoff. 5. Migrants suffer abuses in Libya. UN denounces. 6. Germany will no longer train Libyan coast guards due to abuses. 7. Will Germany pay for Russian gas in rubles? TASS news agency reported that Germany will pay for gas in rubles and says that German companies agree to this, but this news has not been confirmed. 8. Germany says Putin backed down from demanding gas payments in rubles. 9. Putin gives in and will allow Europe to continue paying for Russian gas in euros and not in rubles, a relief for Germany since 55% of the gas it consumes comes from Russia. 10. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said the process of switching the ruble payments for Russian gas export deliveries will take time and will not begin immediately this week, despite the March 31st deadline set by presidential order. China. First, China is more determined to boost its ties with Russia. Second, China to impose visa restrictions in retaliation against US officials. Third, Chinese Defense Ministry urges US to stop inflating the Chinese threat. 4. China warns against turning Asian countries into tools of great powers. 5. US accuses China of suffocating Taiwan. Economy. First, India and Russia explore rupee and ruble payment scheme to avert crisis. Second, India and Russia complete work of SWIFT alternative. India and Russia have completed work on an alternative transaction platform, seen as a replacement for the SWIFT system, the Economic Times reported, citing sources. Third, US removes Russian fertilizers from sanctions to avoid product shortages. Fourth, US and Europe fear imposing sanctions against Kaspersky Lab. 5. The euro fell below 88 rubles for the first time since February 21st. 6. The dollar exchange rate at the beginning of trading fell to 83.38 rubles. 7. Standard & Poor's removes Russian and Belarusian bonds from its 11 indices. 8. US waits the largest extraction in the history of the emergency oil reserve. Curious. First, solar storm. As predicted, a cannibalistic coronal mass ejection hit the Earth's magnetic field on March 31st. First contrast triggered a G1 class geomagnetic storm with the possibility of stronger storms as the Earth passes through the magnetized wake of the solar storm. Second, mysterious waves discovered on the Sun that violate the laws of physics. Astronomers have spotted unusual vortex flows on the Sun. They move in the opposite direction to the star's rotation and 3 times faster than they should be according to the laws of hydrodynamics. Third, earthquake of magnitude 6.8 near New Caledonia. The earthquake was recorded at a depth of 10 kilometers. And that's all for today. Thanks a lot, dear friends.